Hi everyone, thanks for coming. I'm glad you all could make it. My name is Butch Porter. I'm an activist in Northern Virginia, and I'm proud to be involved in this fine organization. I got involved because I read Randall O'Toole's book, Best Laid Plans. Anybody ever heard of that one? Yeah. Okay. So I'm not an economist. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a public policy expert. I got involved because I was concerned about what is going on around me. I went to meetings, I went to charrettes, and I went to stakeholder meetings. I started going to those. I joined my business association in my downtown Leesburg, started going to these stakeholder meetings. What else do they call them? Task forces. Those are always fun. Listening sessions where we listen to them. Actually, a couple weeks ago, we had another one of those listening session. And finally, the merchants of downtown Leesburg decided to literally stage a revolt, and they started having their own meetings, and good things are happening in downtown Leesburg. After 8 years of being harassed by the planners. So every once in a while, people start to get it. But I was proud to get involved. I got involved in 2013, and I went to the conference last year, missed a meeting, and that's how I became your illustrious president for a year. I want to thank Baruch, who has put in a lot of time and a lot of energy and effort getting this conference together. Don't clap yet, because we should wait until the conference is over to determine whether he did really that great of a job. I'm sure he will have. And also thanks obviously to Kathleen and Eileen for all the work they've done in putting this together as well. I want to introduce our next speaker. I've known him for a long time, and one of the things I like about Mr. Daugherty is that he kind of rolls with the punches, and if he's asked to introduce a keynote speaker upon coming to an event, he's more than capable of doing that. So Gerard Daugherty is the Precinct 3 Commissioner for Travis County, and he is going to introduce our speaker for the evening, which is Congressman Blake Farenthold from right here in Texas. Thanks. Gerald?
Let's see if I can spell this T on all of this electronics up here and really throw this thing into a tailspin. Well, good evening. My name is Gerald Daugherty, and I am the Precinct 3 County Commissioner here in Travis County. And I'm delighted, that you all came to our fabulous city to witness a little bit of our traffic. I mean, if we took this thing out on I-35 about 500 yards from here right now, you would understand exactly why you all are here. I thought y'all would never get here. We have needed replacements for a long time, and I do understand that the people in this room are folks that we're going to have a kindred spirit with. Future of affordability, I think, is technically what this conference is going to be about. You can't have any sort of conference in Austin, Texas, without also having to talk about mobility and transportation. There are some people that I'm going to want to make sure, and as a matter of fact, I'm going to insist that you know their names. Because they are folks that have helped all of us that have been in the trenches for a long time here in Austin as it relates to mobility, transportation, and I do want to recognize, obviously, Randall O'Toole, Mr. Wendell Cox, and Tom Rubin. Those three people in particular have been great stewards and have been so helpful to all of us here with our efforts with trying to bring some sort of sensibility to this community as it relates to mobility and traffic. I do want you all to know a couple of other folks. I would like to introduce my very great friend Jim Skaggs, and I know that you all that have been involved with the American Dream Coalition, at least you know his name. I will tell you, you cannot believe what a steward of a community this guy has been. When we first got started, he knew very little about me. We were racquetball friends. And one day he asked me, he said, why is it that everybody comes up to you and wants to talk to you about transportation, and especially public transportation? And Jim had just retired from a Fortune 500 company here that, as a matter of fact, that he had brought back from life support to selling it for, I think, around $1.4 billion. So that's the kind of guy that we have with Jim Skaggs. He and I have become just best friends. He has certainly has been a mentor to me, and I cannot say enough about this guy, and I would like for everybody to give him a round of applause. The person that I'm going to really put on the spot and embarrass now is his beautiful wife, Betty Skaggs. Betty, just raise your hand. You don't have to stand up. And if she had to stand up, she'd have to stand on the chair anyway. Bless her heart. Betty has endured probably 15, 18 years of what Jim and I have been going through, which is just an out-and-out battle with, quite frankly, a community that is, in our opinion, so out of touch with reality as it relates to mobility and transportation. We have always known that we have had a battle in front of us, and but we've stood tall. But Betty, bless her heart, she really thought that she was gaining her husband back after, a career of probably some 40 plus years of being an executive's wife. And then she found out that he had met me, and bless her heart, I mean, I will tell you, I mean, sometimes I tread lightly around Betty because she knows that this subject matter has, quite frankly, taken so many hours away from their retirement. Betty, I do understand what that has meant to you, but I just want you to know how much I appreciate you and all of your love and support that you've given, not just to your husband, but to myself. And I apologize that that I have taken him away so much, but this community would be lost without him. There's another person in this room, when people say, Gerald, it's you and Jim that's always out trying to bring sensibility to the Austin community. A good friend of Jim and myself, John Lewis. John, raise your hand. John Lewis, it's the three here. John Lewis, Jim Skaggs, myself, along with Betty in the background, that continue to meet the challenge that this community throws at us. I wish that this conference would be mandatory for everybody in this community to come and to be a part of, because I know that there will be more sensibility talked about in the next 2 days by the group of people. I mean, not just our panelists, but people that have come to listen and to, quite frankly, to learn. I'm delighted that Jim has asked me to make the introductions and to welcome you all to Austin, Texas. We're glad to have you. I know that Jim has worked hard to bring this conference to Austin, and I'm glad, Jim, that you have persevered and that you have brought that. Randall, thank y'all very much for coming to Austin, Texas, and we just, we hope that we can show you a little bit of Texas gratitude before you all leave. Before I introduce, the keynote speaker tonight, I was told, when you get over there and you sit next to that congressman and you find out something about that congressman that's not, on the program, because everybody can read the program. And don't you hate it when you go to a program and somebody stands up and says, well, this congressman is from here and he won by this many votes. And I said, now, Congressman, tell me a couple of things about you that the group might find interesting. And he said, well, met my wife in 1983 here in Austin, Texas, going to a Jimmy Buffett concert. 4 years, married her. I don't know if you just have one child, but you and Debbie have 2 children. You know, I have watched Congressman Farenthold from afar, given that he is from down in the Corpus area. This is not something that county commissioners in Travis County get an opportunity to share that much time with all of the congressmen, especially if you're not from Austin, Texas. But this guy is quite a guy. He's one of us. He's a person that we can depend on, and when push comes to shove, you've got to have somebody in Washington that has a little bit of clue about what we are dealing with and the issues that we're going to continue to deal with unless we do some very sensible things. Congressman, why don't you come on up and let's hear what you have to say. Thank you for coming in this evening. I know Austin, Texas is a place that you don't mind being, but welcome back. A round of applause.
Thank you, Commissioner. Wow, there really are a lot of electronics down here. You know, you talked about what a great group of presenters you're going to have. I'm happy to be the first because the bar is low. And you know, I am a member of Congress. As a whole, our approval rating is right up there with cockroaches. But the old saying is, you know, you hate Congress, but you love your congressman, and that's the only thing that saves me. You know, at least 25% of us in Congress have some common sense. We want to talk a little bit about transportation, and boy, was the timing right as we passed a new highway bill. I'm going to tell you, I'm a little concerned because it was rushed through the committee and rushed into the House, and I caution you, I'm going to do some question and answers after this. I caution you on questioning me on the details because there were 280 amendments offered. I can talk about the ones I voted on, but there are a whole lot that were voice voted. So my staff is actually still putting together what the final bill looks like with all the amendments that passed the House. Add to that, we're going to go to a House-Senate conference committee, which actually I think is a good thing because we've kind of been bypassing that step. It worked for 200 years, and then we kind of quit doing that, and I think that's a mistake. You got to get the House and Senate working together in some formalized fashion, like a conference committee, as opposed to the chairman of the House committee and the chairman of the Senate committee going out into the proverbial smoke-filled room and hammering out the details. I don't think that's the way to run Congress. And I don't think sticking the XM Bank in the highway bill is the way to run Congress either. That puts me between a rock and a hard place because I'm a huge transportation advocate, and we're now into what really has made Congress in the 5 years that I've been there, I think the key factor in the dysfunction in Congress. And I'm going to lay that at actually probably some of y'all's feet, because I'm going to call it the not good enough branch of the Republican Party. I was giving an example to Randall earlier. The way to get big things done is to do several little things in a row. Imagine being back in the days of Mad Men. Most of y'all seen the TV series Mad Men, kind of set in the 60s, advertising agency. Everybody came home, had a cigarette and a drink when they got home, kind of like Bewitched almost. But if back in those days I'd stood up in front of a group like this and said, you know, in about 30 years you're not going to be able to smoke within 25 feet of any building, I'd have been laughed off the stage. But you know, it started with, well, we're going to set up some smoking sections in the restaurant and on the airplane, and then we're going to set up, say, you can't smoke in your office. You got to go to the smoking area inside your building. Yep. Now you got to go outside, and now you got to go 25 feet away from the entrance. And the anti-smoking people got what they want. It took them a while, but they got what they want. And I think if Republicans would take that approach to some things, we would make some progress forward. And you know, I guarantee you a day doesn't go by that I don't hear, well, that's not good enough, you can't vote for it, and if you do, I'm not going to vote for you again. I'm getting tired of telling the cigarette story, but it does work. The other analogy is, if I'm coaching a football team, I'm not going to win on a Hail Mary pass on every play. I need the 3 and 4 yard running plays in there too. You just don't get all the way every time. Now, that being said, you occasionally have to go, that isn't even close to good enough, and the trick is finding out where that is. And so, you know, this is the struggle a lot of us are going to have with the transportation bill with XM Bank in it. You know, it's got some reforms in it. We're streamlining some of the environmental. We're condensing 6 departments of the Department of Transportation down into 1. A lot of simplification, trying to return some of the control to the states, more block granting of funds to the states. So, I mean, we've got some reforms in there. It's got a cutoff. It's only funded for 3 years, so we got to find some more money for it somewhere. And I'm going to stop. I told a story. I think it's Rick Perry, Texas governor. I may be attributing this wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's Rick Perry that said, damn whoever came up with the term freeway, they're either taxways or tollways. There's no such thing as a freeway. But money's an issue, and you know, what do you do in a country that feels very strongly overtaxed, with a majority of Republicans who have pledged not to raise taxes? How do you go about increasing funding for highways? We've streamlined a lot. Believe me, there's still plenty more you can do. There are all sorts of innovative financing. You know, getting foreign investment in toll roads, TIFIA loans, you name it. There are lots of ways to do it, but that doesn't really get to the root of the problem. We got a gasoline tax that hasn't increased in decades. You've got vehicles that are getting more and more miles to the gallon, but still have the same wear and tear on the roads. And then add to that electric vehicles that don't pay a nickel in gasoline tax over the life of the vehicle. So, you know, what do you do? And then you say, all right, well, let's see what Oregon does. Let's see about a vehicle miles driven tax. And then how do you collect that on an ongoing basis? If you really want to do it, do you want to go the whole 9 yards and actually add into it some anonymized GPS data where you can create demand pricing? So if you drive at rush hour, you're paying more than if you drive at non-rush hour periods. I mean, that seems like a common sense solution, but boy, you got to open source that. So the hackers can look at it and guarantee that you're not, Big Brother isn't collecting data on where you go. Of course, if you carry a phone, I'd say 75+% of the people haven't turned off the location services in your phone. I can go to Google and it'll tell me everywhere I've been in the past 3 years if I had my phone in it. So, do I trust Google more than the government? Google's not going to put me in jail, but I'm still a little bit worried about what they're going to do with my data and who they're going to sell it to. I carry an Android phone so I can take the battery out just when I really want to go off the grid. Apple got smart about that. They're not going to let you go off the grid. You can't take the battery out of that phone. Anyway, I'm completely getting off transportation, but I am excited about some of the things we're doing. Devolving this to the states is really, I think, the way to go on it. And I think you could actually even go further. You could cut the motor vehicle fuel tax and let the states kick it up for a wash and give them more control without the money getting sucked up into the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C. Because I guarantee you can probably pick up 15-20% just in stuff that gets swallowed up in red tape in Washington. The number that sticks in my mind is it was in education. What the federal government does in education, 20 cents on every dollar gets eaten up in Washington, D.C. before it gets back to the schools in the state. I bet you the schools in the state spend another 20 cents complying with all the federal regulations. So you could basically almost double what goes to the school if you just block grant the money to the states. And find me education in the Constitution. It isn't there. But we do have build post roads, which is how we do the highways. There is a federal role in it. If you listen to, it's not Moore's Law, it's one of the computer networking. The value of a network goes up exponentially with the number of roads, or the number of nodes on the network. The same is true for roads. You'd never get to some of the cities in the Dakotas if they didn't have a federal contribution to the system. So it's a constitutionally authorized, and I think it's appropriate to make sure we have maximum amount of connectivity. But I think the federal government has taken way too much control in the roads. It costs way more to build a federal highway than it does to build a state highway. The environmental process is crazy. I'd love to see some more substantial. There was an amendment that failed that I thought really should have gone through. Any replacement of an existing bridge ought to not have to go through any modern bridge built to current standards is going to be better than whatever old bridge there was there. It's not going to have a significant effect. I mean, common sense says it's not going to have a significant effect if it's along virtually the same route. The runoff's going to be cleaner and safer and better treated, and everything's going to be, it's just going to be better there. But a lot of what's done is defies common sense. And I'm glad to see you guys are having this seminar, coming up with the next 4 or 5 articles for Randall to write in whatever newspaper will take him. And it actually gives some guidance. Don't think we have the answers to everything in Washington. We're lucky to have the answers to anything. And so we rely on folks like you to help us with the ideas and help us push it through. So rather than just kind of ramble on, which I could do for a substantial period of time, I'm willing to. I'm going out on a limb here because you got some experts in the field here. I'm willing to go along with a round or two of stump the Congressman if you want to ask some questions. But I will tell you now, I'm dyslexic. Don't hold me to any numbers or percentages I give you. Because I'm the first to confess I'm not a numbers guy. I was a lawyer. The first job I had, they put me in the oil and gas department of the law firm and wanted me to go out to the courthouse and write and do title opinions about who has what interest. And if you look at it, you end up with 100 people with a .0315 fractional interest in an oil well. After the first one of those I tried, they moved me back into real estate and from oil and gas. Of course, this was the late 80s, and they were doing them by hand. I go, this sure would be easier if you put them in a spreadsheet. And the partner I was working with said, "What's a spreadsheet?" I'll give them credit. It was 80, 88, 89. But my favorite, one more quick law firm story in technology. We had a senior partner in there. I was on the technology committee, so we were bringing different computers in for him to try. And he called me after about 4 hours and said, "Blake, come get this rat thing out of here," talking about the mouse on the computer. So, fortunately, most law firms have dealt with that. If you still think a mouse is a rat, you're probably working at the VA. All right, so if you got some questions.
I'll get a microphone
All
for
right.
the audience and place it right there.
Actually, we can put JD, my assistant, to work. He can walk the microphone around if we don't want. Oh, it's all hooked up. Never mind. You're going to have to come up.
I can carry the whole stuff.
Yeah. JD's a Marine, former Marine. I guess you're always a Marine. They take offense at that. But it's great to have him on my team.
I need to turn that up here. That should work.
All right.
So I'm Vic Bishop from Bellevue, Washington, near Seattle. The state of Washington is pretty much a neutral state you know, about as much that we send to Washington DC comes back to Washington minus the 15 or 18 or 20%. So I'm interested in this block grant, additional block grant thing, and how is that going to impact the neutral states?
Hey, the allocation among the states isn't changed substantially, so by block granting, you're actually empowering the state departments of transportation to prioritize the projects even more than they do now.
Okay, so that brings up the second question, is a portion of the federal money comes back into our MPO, our Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is quite strong and does the wrong thing with the money. So will it go to the state DOT, or will the Puget Sound Regional Council get its share?
I think it filters through the state DOTs, but it will, the DOTs most likely will kick it down to the MPOs.
Right, they know how to build bike lanes and transitways.
Listen, we tried really hard to rein some of that in. I voted against most of the beautification and bike trail amendments, but I co-sponsored one that said if a private company wanted to do highway beautification and, you know, plant flowers in the shape of a Nike logo, we'd let them do that. If they wanted to spend their private money on doing that, you know, knock yourselves out. Go ahead.
Congressman, thanks. John Charles, Portland, Oregon, one of the disenfranchised voters in Rural Hours District. So,
Where's my bicycle pin?
I was glad to hear you mention the word devolution, because I personally am a big fan of devolving, especially transportation finance, to the states, which would solve by itself a whole bunch of spending problems. But I know that Congress is probably not very enthused about turning all that over. So can you just talk about the reality check of, if you mention the word devolution, do you just get laughed out of the room, or do you think there's some small glide path over a long period of time where devolution could actually get some traction?
I think it's a good Republican theme. It's one of the big differences between the parties right now, is an overall philosophy of what the role of the federal government is. Bigger versus smaller, more power to the state, more power to the individual. And as we maintain Republican majorities, I think you're going to see a path toward devolution. You know, there is a group within the Republican Party, though, that really their message is we can run a big government better than they can run a big government. Fortunately, that's a relatively small group. The Tea Party wave of 2010 kind of shook things up, and you've got outside groups that I sometimes have an issue with, but I also think there's some good that comes from it in holding folks accountable. And you need somebody to remind you every once in a while why you're up there. And so I remain cautiously optimistic. If I had my way, if I were king for a day, I would get Congress rolling on. We start with A and work our way to Z with every federal agency, and have them come in and justify their being, justify their budget. But I went to Washington, and when I bought a condo, I was worried about what I was going to tell the voters back home. It's like, oh man, he plans to be there forever. He's going DC, and he bought a condo. Well, all right, my payments, the condo would be less than my rent, so that was one good thing. I said, and then I figured it would be a good investment. I was going to make some money on it. But the fact of the matter is, if I'm successful in what I want to do in Washington, the size of the city is going to shrink substantially, and I'm going to lose my butt on the condo. So maybe it was a bad investment. Go ahead.
Thanks again, Congressman. And I'm also in the same boat in the condo market in D.C. I'm Mark Scribner from Competitive Enterprise Institute, and you're probably not going to like these questions because I'm going to ask you two things about the prospects for the next highway bill. Have you heard anything, is there any movement on lifting the current federal prohibition on states tolling their own interstate segments, just sort of going back to your tax roads versus toll roads things, and really allowing federalism to take hold there? And then second, on NEPA, you know, there's only so many CEs we can keep on doing until we get to the point where we're looking at fundamental NEPA reform, but then kind of the elephant in the room are these state mini NEPAs, where the interaction between federal NEPA and the mini NEPAs can create some really nasty effects. Is there any talk of potentially reaching out to the labor community that I know really doesn't like a lot of the things that their sometimes environmental allies like in this process, but doing fundamental NEPA reform and possibly even preempting some of these nastier state mini NEPAs?
Well, all right, so as far as, I think the state NEPAs are, you're seeing a devolution of NEPA approval to the states that have laws equal to the federal law, which I think is kind of maybe asking for a little bit of trouble, because if it's not exactly like, you're going to have a multitude of issues there. Politically, I don't think you're ever going to see I wouldn't want to have to go back to the voters in the 27th District of Texas and say, yeah, I went ahead and told Texas they could toll the roads that you've already paid for. I mean, that's going to be tough. But the real elephant in the room for the next highway bill is, how do you pay for it? And that may even just be a 3-year deal. And, you know, how do you sell it? I could pitch, you know, I think I could sell a switch to a vehicle miles driven tax. If it were revenue neutral, it wouldn't be a tax increase. You might be able to slip in some indexing in there so you don't fall further behind. But the real issue, I think, needs to rebrand the highway, the gasoline tax or a miles driven tax as a highway user fee. The problem is, but here's the problem. User fee polls worse than tax. So somebody with some marketing background needs to come up with some words to do that. We need to stick Frank Luntz or somebody on finding a way to come up with some language that deals with that. Because, you know, nobody's going to go for a motor vehicle tax increase easily. User fee, probably an easier sell, but is there a better word out there? Yeah, if somebody thinks of it, blake@blake.com is my email. Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here. I'm Bill Richardson from Madison, Wisconsin, and Paul Ryan is one of our favorite people there, and I'm hoping, like you, that he will help shake things up and make things happen. Mike, I wanted to compliment you. You mentioned that you would go through the budget of each of the administration's federal agencies. One of the things you didn't mention when you were first starting, that's what upset me a little bit, and you said something very truthful, which is taxpayers are tired of seeing our taxpayer dollars go in and be wasted. The thing you didn't mention was cut spending. There's plenty of money going to Washington. You need to cut spending, and that's doing what you just said. Look at all those other programs that are wasting millions and billions of dollars. Finally, my question, one of the things, is it possible to strip out of the transportation budget all of the things you were just talking about, flowers and transportation and museums and bike paths? We're getting bike paths to death in Madison.
And we're working on cutting that back. I think you see a little bit of cut back there. The other big complaint is dealing with, you know, what do you do with transit within the, with, you know, how much, if any, of what you pay in gasoline tax ought to go for transit. The argument being that, look, there's no way in hell you're going to build another lane for cars in New York City. But you've got cars driving in New York City paying gasoline tax. So shouldn't some of that go towards, you know, subways or whatever in New York to improve their transportation? and lessen the congestion for those foolish enough to try to drive a car in New York City. So, that's the other side of that argument. I think we spend way too much on transit, but 0 may not be the number either.
Tom Rest, Nellis County, Florida. That's the Tampa Bay area. That's a perfect lead into my question. New York City is a unique case, and it's often used to, they often try to apply that same model elsewhere. And you mentioned, I think you said vehicle tax, you meant gas tax, right? Gas tax.
Vehicle miles driven tax
Right.
versus...
Or even a gas tax. I think there are a lot of people who would be willing to pay more if it didn't go for transit. Because, for instance, in our area, if you just take the money and use it to improve roads and not send, a lot of things are built into transportation that aren't transportation. So we pay this gas tax, and then we find the money is used for other things, not just transit. It can be used for sensitivity training.
Your transit museum, whatever.
Well, yeah, transportation museum. And I might be one of those not good enough Republicans, but I thank you for using that term, because our congressman called us the scorecard community, and some of your colleagues, you call them the shutdown caucus. I prefer the not good enough Republicans. My point is, and my question to you is, if you can be sure that the money goes to roads, does that also not poll well? Because, the buses, they also benefit from better roads.
So why do you want if you need to improve the roads in your states, why do you need the federal government to raise the gasoline tax? Why can't your state legislature put another penny or two on the gasoline tax and not go through as much of the BS that you'd have to go through in Washington? And Texas has stepped up. We've had a constitutional amendment dedicating money from vehicle registrations and sales tax on cars to go to highways. We've dipped into the rainy day fund, which is our emergency fund that is primarily funded by oil and gas severance tax, and devoted that to highways. So Texans are reaching into their own pockets to do that. I was in Pennsylvania with Bill Schuster doing a tour of how horrible their bridges are, and they were talking, 60% of our transportation funds come from Washington, D.C. I go, damn, we only get 40 in Texas. What could we do if we got 60? So.
Hi, Rob Whitfield, among other things, I'm with the Northern Virginia Tea Party, so I'll extend a welcome to you. Come see us sometime next year. And thanks too to Jim Skaggs for his great tour today. I've been involved in various transportation issues in North Virginia, including the Dulles Rail Project and right now I-66. One of the major problems I see is that we have the MPO for the Washington area called the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, and the Transportation Planning Board, which makes decisions for the metropolitan region. What we have now is a group of bikers and transit advocates who control that organization and who are in a position to have Maryland and D.C. make decisions on Virginia. Can we do something in Congress to limit the powers of MPOs? And in particular, this air quality standards, I don't know enough about what's coming with the carbon dioxide reduction standards. There may be others. But is there a role for Congress to play to limit the roles of MPOs?
Again, I don't want to sound unsympathetic to your concern, but your local people put those people on the MPO. Fortunately, we have in Texas been blessed with some pretty good MPOs, but I do understand your frustration. I think the real solution, though, comes back to what needs to come out of Washington is transit dollars or highway dollars go to highways. This bike path doesn't move many people, and it's certainly not outside of a densely populated metro area. Now, that being said, I did have a staffer who just moved to another office who skateboarded to work. So we're going to have skateboard paths next. He was very hipster. He'd fit right in down here in Washington.
Somebody should come and see the Council of Governments. I call it the Washington Kremlin, because basically 3/4 of the room is taken up. I think there's 86 members of the TPB. And the problem with Virginia is we represent maybe a third, and so the 2/3 from Maryland and DC
Yeah.
control
Control
the
it.
decisions, and that's what has to stop.
Well, don't get me started on what a boondoggle the Silver Line is. If you're going to build a light rail or an extension to a metro system, it ought to be at least as fast to get to your destination as driving a car. And it about takes, the projections are it's going to take double the amount of time to take the Silver Line to Dulles than it will to drive. Really? Why are we bothering? I made the mistake of taking the Dallas light rail from DFW into downtown Dallas just so I could say I could. That was 2 hours of my life I'll never get back. I was sitting there going, we're not going very fast. And you don't stop, the crossing things come down, but I actually downloaded a speedometer app for my GPS. We maxed out at 42 when I could have been doing 65 on the expressway. So, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jim Horn, former state senator from the state of Washington, and served as a chairman of the Transportation Committee during that period of time. And Congressman, I guess it makes us really feel good when you say the solution to this problem is send the money to the state people, because we are so much smarter than you are. and we will be able to withstand the impacts of the lobbyists when you weren't. And so we're a little bit closer to the lobbyists, but to think that Congress thinks that we can do it when they can is a little bit like being in dreamland.
Right.
Now, it seems to me like when you're looking at the transportation system, the interstate highway system was one of the most successful projects started in the Eisenhower administration, and it brought interstate commerce through all the states, and all the states have benefited from that system. The key element of that system was money was given based on the project, not allocation of money to do it on certain things. And so money flowed to the states when they had a project that deserved and met the standards of performance on that area. Now, it seems to me we ought to take a lesson from that, and if we know that that was successful back then when we allocated money based on projects, then we ought to go back to that and not just give a bunch of money to the states and think us local politicians are a lot better at withstanding the lobbyists than you are.
Well, I'll tell you, I guess I may be a little bit spoiled from being from Texas, because I guarantee you, we throw all the transit money to Texas with no strings, there ain't gonna be any bike paths built. You know, it's gonna go to the highways. But but obviously with the MPO in the DC area and in some areas of the country, that may not be true. But I don't claim to be an expert in what the transportation needs are in a mountainous region of Colorado or a desert in Arizona, and one size fits all as a general rule doesn't work.
Well, that's true. But again, if you set up criteria for a project, then everybody in the states clamor to find that project and submit it to you on that basis. Or even if you're going to send the money down to the state, require that they do it by project instead of an allocation into these people that got bikes and these people that's got, this, that, and the other that is there. But the key element, I think, on success in the transportation is recognizing the projects that do the most benefit and funding those projects and not an allocation of money. The MPO, incidentally, and you probably know this better than I would do, was set up to funnel money around state government into given cities, primarily those in California that started it. But it allowed the cities to have a greater voice over that money than the state did.
Bringing it back down closer to the people, from the feds, from the states, to the cities. And I guess, it may not be the perfect solution, but it is one. Yes, ma'am.
I'm from Florida, so we're right there with Texas and Dock Road. And what we've seen in the Tampa Bay area is a continuous fight for the local municipalities to want to raise our taxes for rail projects, high-cost rail projects. And there's just this perversion of these municipalities to go after this because of the New Starts and the Small Starts programs. So I'd like to know your thoughts on reforming or getting rid of those, because if you dry up that money, then these boondoggles basically go away, and it's really, I mean, it's a hard fight. We have, our electeds, our local electeds that really work. I mean, it's the taxpayer, they're using our money against us to raise our taxes for these high-cost projects. And I feel that if this grant money went away, or at least was, very strict use of it, that we'd stop some of the nonsense. So what are your thoughts?
Or can anybody in here point to a rail program in the last 50 years that's been successful?
No.
All right, somebody in Washington besides me needs to take note of that. Do you have one, Randall? You're the expert.
The Union Pacific into the Powder River Coal Basin.
All right,
Congressman, thank you for being here. It's been very interesting to get your perspective. I'm John Niles from Seattle, Washington. Used to be in D.C. I was in the city government of the first Home Rule Administration in Washington, D.C. So I've seen a lot. At the end of the day, this is kind of a yes or no question. I'm going to just describe the situation where I think there's a federal interest. It has to do with Interstate 90. Interstate 90, most of us know, it's like one of those coast-to-coast highways. It goes from Boston, I think it's the Mass Pike actually, it goes all the way to Seattle. It's an amazing commerce route, especially as it gets...
How about that big dig? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we have versions of that, but not around I-90. So we have a situation, I just was curious if you're aware of this. Interstate 90, part of the Dwight David Eisenhower interstate highway system, is being compromised right now with federal supervision. It's not finally approved. There's this attempt well underway to build a passenger railroad, a light rail, on lanes of that highway. A short segment of it between Seattle and the next community over Bellevue. Those of us who looked at the numbers on this know that it's going to reduce the capacity. It's going to hose up this highway in many ways. It's going to take a tunnel that they're squeezing in an extra lane on the outside to make, in theory, the capacity maintained, but it won't. People who've looked at this, they're going to squeeze 2 lanes into a tunnel that has only 1 lane. What I'm saying is I think we've got something here that there's a federal interest there, and a federal highway is being messed up. Would you see any prospect of Inspector General just taking a last look at this before they actually begin to cut up the concrete and go forward? Have you
I'll
heard
pitch
of this?
it.
Have you heard of this deal?
I had not. I mean, I'll pitch it. I'll pitch having somebody look at it. There's no issue with that. And, we talk about the light rail and the boondoggles that we've seen on this. I don't get it. We were talking here before I spoke about, what are we doing with rail in general? Who's going to want to take it in Texas when it's 100 degrees and you've got to walk to your final destination? You're Seattle. You're going to have to walk in the rain to your final destination. I mean, there are times of the year I'll get in my car and go across the street here. It's that hot, and the transit right now doesn't work. The rail transit doesn't work in non-walkable cities. Now, I do think we may be coming to a paradigm shift where we can re-examine some of these, because you've got the millennial generation looks at things differently than we do. They see transportation as a service. You see Uber, you see the Zip cars, you see the cars to go. They don't own a car, they just want one near where they are. And it's not just in transportation. They don't buy music anymore. They buy a subscription to Pandora. And I don't have a clear enough crystal ball to know what kind of impact that paradigm shift has, but you add autonomous vehicles to it, you could see a big paradigm shift over the next 25 years. And that's in transportation, that's a relatively short time frame.
Well, this particular bridge, this Interstate 90 is going to be messed up, whether you're talking about automated vehicles, or you're talking about buses, whether you're talking about the trucks where the farmers take things. I'm just saying. So I would appreciate it if we wrote a letter pass that on to...
If you'll get me the, JD, if you'll get us the info, and JD will get it to me, and...
I think there's a federal interest, so thanks.
I'll absolutely have some folks take a look at it.
I think Dick is going to be our last one.
Okay, all right.
Thanks.
Congressman, thank you for being here. My name is Dick Paler. I'm from the other Washington as well. And I'm going to follow up on the last couple of questions on this same topic. And full funding grant agreements have caused so much turmoil in our region of trying to get decent transportation decisions. And what I struggle with is, other than for political power, why do people in Washington, D.C. think that they should have something to do with local transit? Transit is local. And what I don't understand is why, again, other than for the obvious reasons.
You're the preacher, I'm the choir here.
Yeah. You know, Senator Patty Murray brags about the amount of money that she has brought back to the state of Washington. She gets all kinds of praise. And I'll never forget a response that I got from her office about why she thinks that that was a good thing. And all she could talk about was how it's going to reduce congestion. And we all know what that statement from her means is, that she knows nothing about what she's talking about. And so what advice do you have for all of us here in the room about how we can get Washington, D.C. out of the local transit funding business? Because they don't belong there. It should be funded locally. Transit, as we like to say, is an important, very small part of the system that we need. So that's my question to you.
It's all in who you vote for. I mean, you've got to elect the right people that feel that way. Of course, it's going to be a big election in 2016. I mean, this isn't a political rally, so I don't want to dive too deeply in that. But I could start preaching on that one too very easily. But I'm sure y'all would much rather hit the bar. So thank y'all for being here.
Really, really appreciate it. Very well done.